time, and thank you for joining. I've had a lot of different thoughts about this, and I've decided that from my perspective, what would have been very useful and helpful for me as an entrepreneur before, years ago, is sharing some of the candid experience, but also sharing some of the personal perspectives that have resulted in a sequence of events, whether it's a success or a failure of a company and so on. So I think from my perspective, I'll focus on a couple of different areas. Initially, I think it's important for you guys to understand, one second, okay. So I think initially, just as an understanding of the sequence of events that led us to where we are today. So my name is Sara Tabana. I was born in Cairo, Egypt in 1983. I grew up in Cairo, and then I moved to the US at the age of 15. I've moved within the US quite a bit. So I initially moved to New Jersey. I went to university there. And then Pennsylvania, Virginia, New York, and even within those states, I moved around quite a bit. I finished my undergraduate degree in mathematics and religion. And then I moved forward with a master's in supply chain management and international transportation management. I continued to work in the US for a bit until the recession. And then after the recession, I moved to Egypt for a couple of years. I worked in Egypt also within the supply chain space, supply chain transportation management, mostly in the rail industry. And then from there, after the revolution, I moved to Dubai. So I've been in Dubai since 2011 until today. I think that in my experience, based on all of these moves and during all of this time, the accumulative experience that I've had, I think I would probably break this down into two different areas. Within, so by definition, within is the ability to look within yourself, the ability to reflect as an entrepreneur, as a company, as a person, the ability for you to look internally and be aware of who you are, what you're doing, and why you're doing what you're doing. Okay, so from there, I think a couple of events have been very critical in my life that I would call game changers or pivoting points or tipping points. So initially, when I was younger, so I've always had a sense of wanting to be independent. I gave some examples here. They're more for me to recall, because these are actually incidents that have made a great impact on my life. Initially, I felt like since I was younger, I always wanted to be very independent. I have 3 brothers. I'm the only girl. All of them are older, but I always had a sense of wanting to do things my way, myself. So when I was little, for example, if someone ties my shoes, I would untie it and retie it myself. So within the sandbox that was a comfort zone, within the sandbox that was governed by my parents. So it was I call it a sandbox because I think it gave a sense of independence, but it's not complete independence, because you're still able to experiment within that space, yet you're exercising, you're practicing, and I think practicing is a keyword, is a keyword and a theme in my life. So it's just a sense of practicing independence within a comfortable space. The second pivoting point, I think, was when I moved to the US. So before I moved to the US, I was in Egypt, and I was in a bubble. Culturally, socially, from an education perspective, you feel like you're in a space that is separate from the rest of the community. After moving to the US, that was another pivoting point for me, hello America, goodbye bubble. The third, I would say, when I was 15, I started working immediately at the university. I received my first paycheck, and that was, again, another sense of independence that I had. I started playing football for the university, so they sponsored my tuition. Again, another sense of independence. Initially, when you're in Egypt, typically what you do for university is that you decide or you pick your major ahead of time. You don't really have a lot of flexibility in terms of changing afterwards what your major is going to be. So in the US, it was a land of opportunity for me when it comes to choosing what I wanted to study. So I changed quite a bit. And then finally, I decided that I was going to go for math because I believed that it was a foundation for everything. Until the incident with the World Trade Center. And then after that happened, I wanted to learn more about religion and how it impacts people and how it impacts behavior and where things stem out of. And I wanted to understand a little bit more. And I realized that my perspective may have been quite limited from before. So I started taking theology classes, and I realized that it gave such an interesting perspective of the world. All of that, I would say, was still within the sandbox of independence. So I still had my parents around. I was still allowed to make small mistakes and recover from them. I claimed independence, but at the same time, I wasn't completely there. Another thing that I realized about myself in the early days is that for me, I was taking piano classes since I was younger, but my love for piano classes depended on the teacher. So based on that, I realized that for me, the connection with people is what's important. Finally, after this stage of my life, there was an expansion in the sandbox of independence. And that's when I realized that I needed to woman up. So my father passed away in 2005. It was my last year of college. And the sense of sandbox or security when one of your parents passes away is really shaken. And it's a turning point because you realize that you do have true independence. And even though before you were trying to claim it, all of a sudden now you know you're independent, but you also know that you're going to have the impact of all of the consequences of being independent. So you don't really have that network or safety around you anymore that makes you feel like, yeah, you're in a sandbox where you can still make mistakes and be able to quickly recover. It was a big realization, and it was a big exposure to a part of life that I needed to understand better. I needed to understand fear. I need to understand many things. Afterwards, so that was in 2005. I graduated college, and then I went through the biggest recession in the US. So 2008, I lost my job. I literally had no money and I had no job, and pretty much all of my friends were in the same stage. In addition to that, I had a storage unit that had all of my stuff, and something happened with the storage unit where I also lost all of my stuff. So I moved from the US to Egypt, and I literally didn't have anything. So I didn't have a job, money, nothing. And I also had student loans that I needed to pay off. I moved to Egypt, and just within a couple of weeks, I was able to land a job. And I was working in Egypt about a year. After work, I separated from the company that I was with, and I started my own consultancy. And then a few months after that, the revolution happened. So I saw the unimaginable happen, and that's the quote that was used in the BBC in the paper when the revolution happened in Egypt. I stayed in Egypt for a few months, and then I got a job in Dubai. I had never been to Dubai before. It was in healthcare IT. And I remember during the interview, I actually said, look, I know nothing about healthcare. I know little about IT. My dad was a doctor, so maybe that would sort of qualify me, not really. However, I'm willing to learn, and I'm happy to move. And I think that this is going to be a good transition for me. So I gave it a shot, and the company also accepted me, and they gave it a shot, and I moved to Dubai. I would say these were the major events so far until that move to Dubai. In Dubai, obviously, I did a lot, especially in the startup scene. So I started my own restaurant, and it was the first certified sustainable restaurant. I've been involved also in a couple of different startups in Dubai. What really intrigues me is, I would say more around social responsibility. So within the social responsibility space, I feel like these are companies that are, they have the purpose, they're purpose driven, but it's also the purpose is the deciding factor. So if you compare something that is, whether it's commercially viable or not, yes, they check that off from a commercial viability perspective, but it also needs to meet the core purpose of that company or organization. And that's something that I have a lot of respect for. The other game changers for me personally had to do with a lot of travel. So I think since I moved to the US, every weekend I'd pack my bag and go to a different state on my own. And I used to explore the different states. After I left the US, I continued to do that. So I'm always, before COVID, I think travel is a game changer because it really opens your eyes to different experiences. And I think that when you're in that space of being in a different country, being around different people, automatically you open up to be able to experience and allow yourself to experience different things and allow yourself to see from a different perspective. So I think it had a huge influence on my development. Finally, sports. So I've been playing sports since I was a kid. I've played football. I participated in triathlons. I was in the first team that went and participated in the World Triathlons in London. So water sports, kite surfing, I think it has so much to teach, and it's something that for me is the fun part, one of the fun parts of life, and I continue to do that. Okay. So based on that, what would I say are my biggest fears? I would say my biggest fear is fear itself. And the reason why I say fear itself is because I don't think I'm afraid of one specific thing. I'm afraid of my reaction to fear. So a lot of times I'm afraid of heights, but what I don't appreciate is my reaction to my fear of heights. So if you think about it, like if you move, I would say move, but don't move the way fear makes you move, which means that if you're afraid of something, the most difficult place you can be is to react based on that fear, is to respond based on that fear. Because a lot of times that fear is not real, fear is not realistic. It could be based on previous experiences, it could be based on anything. It's good to note it, but I think that, and it takes a lot of practice to be able to overcome that. And it's not really overcoming the fear itself, but I think it's overcoming the way you respond to that fear. The second is uncertainty. So I think that with COVID, with everything, with the movement, with my father passing away at a young age, all of these things created a lot of uncertainties, to the extent that uncertainty or change has become the constant. And I think that most people are experiencing that, and most people go through that, I guess at a different scale, depending on your experiences and how open you are at experiencing life. But change has quickly become the new constant. And with COVID, there's a re-emphasis on how change is the new constant. Finally, my favorite word. So growing up, since I was little, usually it's no for most kids. For me, it was why. I like to have a reason. I like to have a purpose for everything that I understand. What's the reason behind it? Why are we doing this? And I would, when I was little, actually, we used to really bother my parents because I would just ask why repeatedly. So I would just ask why and why and why and why if we're addressing the same topic until they just run out of responses. But that questionnaire, I guess, continues in my mind. So I'm always thinking about what is the driver behind things. Which brings us to the kryptonite. So kryptonite for me, my kryptonite is overthinking. I tend to just go off and continue to think and think and think, and sometimes I'm just deluded in thoughts. Finally, superpowers. So the superpowers, the first one I think is very helpful, which is the ability to switch off. And it has served, I think it's a superpower because many times, particularly if you're an entrepreneur, there's so much going on. You're so involved, and you're so involved emotionally, financially, mentally, physically. You're just involved in every single detail of the startup. You're involved in every detail of what's going on. I think it was really helpful for me to be able to completely switch off, to just turn off the gears, go somewhere else entirely, take a week where I'm just not exposed to anything pertaining to what I'm working on or what I'm doing, and then go back to it after a week with a completely fresh perspective. So it has helped me a lot in terms of going back and really seeing things for what they are. And it has helped in terms of separating myself and giving me a mental break to be able to continue. Because if you're an entrepreneur, I think it goes without saying that you're already taking on a lot on your plate. So allowing yourself to switch off is very healthy for you to be able to go back and be able to have the capacity to keep going. Finally, the last superpower is people. I love people, and I think that my motivation typically is engaging with people, working with people, talking to people, understanding them. So empathy for me plays a big role in everything that I do, and it's a core asset, I would say, because for me, it's something that's very important, and it has helped me build some really great relationships. Okay, so the reason why I basically separated this into a within and a without is because as an entrepreneur, I think that you owe it to yourself to know yourself better. And you owe it to yourself to understand what are the things that have impacted your career, what are the things that have impacted your life, what are the fears that you have, what are the powers that you have, because this self-awareness is going to help you in your journey. It's going to help you because as an entrepreneur, you are the company. So you are the brand, you're starting a company, and you are the representation of that company. You are the brand of that company. So knowing yourself is going to allow you to know what you want, how you want to brand yourself, and it'll allow you to be authentic in terms of the company or the organization that you're trying to build. So understanding these things about yourself and understanding how you can build up or how you can create some practices that will help you develop even further, I think is very important. So the most difficult thing is looking within, understanding yourself, understanding how you operate, understanding why you do the things that you do, so that you can move forward and develop and evolve from there. So this is just an example of how I did this, and this is my personal journey. Okay, so if we look at the common mistakes that are made by entrepreneurs, I basically got this from one of the magazines. It was one of the websites. I mean, entrepreneur.com, and the reason why I put it there is because I think that I've worked in at least 3 startups. One of them I founded myself, and these mistakes we have done in every single startup that I've worked in. Okay, so not spending enough money or spending too much money, thinking you have no direct competition, making hiring decisions based on cost, not setting attainable goals, not thinking about marketing, having too small of a margin, thinking you can do it all by yourself, which is a big one. Thinking you could do it all by yourself as a person, but also as a company. So I think that there's a distinction there, and I think both of them are huge mistakes. And then finally, being incapacitated by fear or what ifs. So even though these are mistakes that are more business mistakes or entrepreneurship mistakes, I think that for all of them, they're very common. And I've personally seen them in every situation that I've worked in. In addition to these, I would say also one of the things that have impacted most of the startups that I've been working with is the fact that as an organization, you're more product focused rather than being focused, or you're less customer centric and more product centric. So I would probably add that to the list as well. The interesting part is they're common. I've seen them 3 times at least. Most of the entrepreneurs that I know would probably agree that they've seen these mistakes quite often. However, as an entrepreneur and as a person who has looked within, what are the things that you're doing about it? Which brings us to the next topic. So there are different ways to approach mistakes, whether they're future anticipated mistakes because of how common they are, or if they're not really mistakes and they're things that you want to adapt, that you want to evolve, you want to develop. And I would say the two key things that I have learned from all of the mistakes that I've done as a person and also as an entrepreneur. And again, not only mistakes, it's just after you look within, there's there are certain ways that you want to evolve in. So I wouldn't necessarily group it all under mistakes. I would group maybe some of it that are, if it's more business oriented, it's a mistake maybe. But if it's something that's personal, it's a chance for you to develop, right? I think it's worth it to go back and ask yourself one question, which is, did you adapt or have you developed? There's a big distinction for me that I realized in that space. So if you've adapted to something, then maybe you've put a patch, maybe you've just found a temporary solution. Another way of adapting, I would say, is maybe you've just accepted that this is something that you've done and you're not really sure how to resolve it. Another way of adapting is moving it into the fear space, which is my least favorite space. So if you move it into the fear space, then you've developed a defense mechanism to adapt to it. So these are different ways in which you can adapt. The alternative is for you to build the awareness that this is something you want to change. So let's say, for example, for all of these common mistakes, if these are things that you want to change, or if there's anything that's personal within you that you want to change, how are you building that preparation? And one, obviously you have to have the awareness, but how are you building the preparation? How are you preparing to make these changes? these are probably a list of, I would say, in my perspective, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So this list of 5 are things that, or tools that I've used that have changed my life, or concepts that I've understood that have truly changed the way I live, and they've changed the way I approach problems, and they've changed the way I look at myself within. The first is deliberate practice. So deliberate practice, I would say, with my obsession for sports, this is probably a stolen concept that I stole from sports. So deliberate practice, usually athletes use deliberate practice. And the idea behind it is that you're doing very specific, purposeful exercises. And these very specific exercises are obviously, this is where the name deliberate comes from. So they're very deliberate in order to get a very specific goal for improving performance. Okay. Why was this very important for me is because from a preparation perspective, I felt like, let's say I had 200 things that in my mind, I wanted to achieve, which is a stretch, right? So that there was, for me, when there's a situation where there's lack of focus, I kind of have a goal, but I'm not really sure how to go about it. So I'm just going through the motion of showing up every day and trying to do 20 different things, hoping that one of them would work. Deliberate practice has really helped me in terms of defining exactly what are the 10 things I want to do that are going to result in a very specific goal, or to meet a very specific goal, or to result in a very specific outcome. When you're an entrepreneur, you're running around, you're doing 200 different things, and this is something that will really help you focus, and it's also going to give you measurable results. Next is mind maps. So mind maps, for me, I think have been a great invention. And I think for most overthinkers, it's also a great invention, because when you work with mind maps, you're able to create a diagram that visually illustrates what's going on in your head. So you have 200 different thoughts. You have a specific topic that you want to address. There are a lot of applications now that you can use for drawing these mind maps. But the good thing is that for every single topic that you have, you're able to put together that mind map, and it would have all of the, so it has a main topic, and then it has subtopics, and then it has subtopics related to that. And it's extremely elaborate, but at the same time, it's an extremely organized way for you to capture your thoughts about a specific topic. So this has really helped me in terms of a development, for me to be able to capture my thoughts, for me to be able to productively look at how I overthink. So instead of looking at me overthinking as something that's not beneficial, how can I manage it? So instead of adapting and just not, trying to shut my brain down, how can I take that and make it work to my advantage by just organizing and placing some structure around the overthinking? The next thing that has helped me develop also is, and as silly as this sounds, the Wim Hof method. So again, this goes back to the fact that I'm aware of the overthinking that I have. So the Wim Hof method focuses on breathing, cold therapy, and commitment. I think it probably helped me in multiple ways. One of them is obviously the breathing really helps to keep you centered. The cold therapy really pushes your limit. And pushes your limit mentally more than anything else. So I think that the last time I went, I was able to stay in the ice bucket for about 11 minutes. And I could have stayed for much longer. The idea behind this is that your mind has this ability to create panic. It has the ability to protect you. But a lot of times you don't need that protection. A lot of times it's more of an adaptation for you to get out of this space of discomfort. If you're able to understand that, if you're able to slow down and separate yourself from that fear and separate your mind from reacting to it, your experience in life is going to be completely different. So I've realized through that experience with the Wim Hof method that if I'm able to make that, it's just a quick distinction. It's usually within the first minute of being in that ice bucket, where your breathing is very difficult, where your body is in shock, where you can make that decision to get out, or you can make that decision to stay. And once you make that decision to stay, then you're able to stay in the bucket for probably, I don't know for how long, but I got out at 11 minutes and I could have stayed more. So this was a big lesson for me to understand how, or a big development for me to work on how I can manage my reactions to fear. So I'm still afraid, my body's still reacting, my mind is still reacting, but I'm making that conscious decision to extend or to delay my reaction a little bit until my body understands that it's okay to be here. Okay, the next one is headspace or meditation. There are so many different forms of meditation that are out there right now. And I think that for me, meditation has also helped a lot in terms of development, because again, it's not a way for you to silence your mind. It's more of a way for you to step back and create space and decide consciously what are the things that you want to focus on. Because in your head, there's only this much space. And as an entrepreneur, you're always running on overload. You're always trying to do more than what you can do. You're always trying to expand that space. And it's impossible to expand it. You'll get burnt out. And I've gotten burnt out. I think once I've gotten burnt out and it was really bad. And for months, I couldn't really do anything. And I realized that I need to develop that to be able to look at my capacity, how much space do I have, meditate, separate myself from everything that's happening, and make a conscious decision with the level of awareness that is going to give me the choice to select what are the things that I want to work on, what are the things that I want to dedicate my life towards, what are the things that I want to dedicate time towards. And what are things that I want to dedicate my time towards today? And what are the ones that I want to move into the future? So these are all different things that you're going to, with level of awareness, be able to prepare yourself to manage yourself better. Finally, as I told you guys, I used to play sports since I was little. I had a really bad injury about 4 years ago. I was in a full leg cast for about a month and a half, and then a wheelchair for maybe 2 or 3 months after. I couldn't really walk for about 6 months. And for someone who's really into sports, this is a huge setback because sports really ground you and they bring you sanity. And if you're used to that since you're little, it's very difficult to separate from it. So after a few months of recovery, a few years of recovery, and physio, and trying to go back into sports and still not being able to, I stumbled across the movement practice. So the movement practice, I encourage you guys to really look at all of these different concepts because I think that there's a lot to learn. The movement practice was developed by someone called Ido Portal. The idea of the movement practice is to not only build the foundation of movement, but to also tap into the intelligence of the body. So how can you do different types of exercises or different types of movements that would also encourage the connection between your brain, your nervous system, and your body. With movement practice, there's no end state. which was something that I really needed to hammer into my head. When you play sports for a long time and you're competing, for example, football, there's an end state. There's always a goal in mind where you want to win, you know, let's say if you're a triathlete, you want to win a race. If you're playing football, you want to win the game, you want to win the season. With the movement practice, it was very different, because with the movement practice, there's no end state. There's progression, and you're continuously learning new things. So that art of learning new things was very important for me from a development perspective. Working in sales and business development, a lot of times you work on a deal continuously. One of the deals I worked on for an entire year. And then after that deal, whether that deal is signed or not, there's a limbo that's right after that happens. And that limbo, you're very confused. You're emotionally not really sure what you should be doing. You feel like you're going to the office and you're just, you know, well, I was so occupied with doing this, and now that I've met the end state or end goal, I'm not really sure what to do in my life anymore, you know? And I realized that after I worked on one deal for an entire year and I lost it, is when I came to the realization that, you know what, I need to work on that as a development. I need to understand how I can practice progression rather than practice an end state. The other thing that this practice does is also the ability for you to always feel like you're working towards something, which means that you're never comfortable. You're never in a comfort zone. When I play football, I'm in a comfort zone. I've played football since I was 5. I mean, I grew up with 3 brothers, so you know, for me, football was something that we did on a daily basis, my comfort zone. When I lived in Egypt, it was my comfort zone. So getting out of that, doing something different, starting a new company, starting a new program. So I enrolled recently in a FinTech program with Oxford University, moving into a different industry. All of these things are new things. And for you to be able to practice not being afraid of new things, you have to make sure that you deliberately put into your life program a way that prepares you, or a practice that prepares you to be okay with getting into things that are new, to be okay with change, to be okay with the fact that change is a constant. So I think that for me, movement practice was very helpful in that space as well. So if we shift the focus from within, so within, again, like this is more of, and I really, even this, even working for this presentation, it really helped me to re-emphasize what are the things that I'm doing. It helped me re-emphasize to myself, what are the things that have really, what were the decision points in my life? What are the things that have resulted in me being who I am today? And I think that this is an exercise that every person in the world needs to do. Because again, you are a reflection of your startup, but you also need to work more on developing rather than adapting. And also my personal belief is that as a human, one of the largest tasks you have being on this earth is for you to is for you to learn you, is for you to understand yourself, and for you to be able to manage yourself and grow and develop. Okay, so we separate ourselves from that. As I told you guys, my passion is mostly driven by people. So if we look at the element of without, which is basically partnerships. So partnerships and shared value. I'll talk more business now. So partnerships and shared value, I think that from my experience in the partnership space, there are 6 pillars of success that I've experienced. The first thing is shared value. So when you're working with a partner, shared value for me is key. Shared value means that there is no, shared value basically means that the pie is bigger. So let's say, for example, I'm working with a partner, and then this partner and I are sitting and trying to understand how we can work together. The means of us working together means that instead of me having a pie that's this big and the partner has a pie that's this big, when we work together, that value that we're trying to create, that value that we're trying to achieve has become much bigger. And I think that's key for me because I don't think I would get into a partnership where that's not the case. So if we are able to, as companies or as people, to capitalize on what we both have separately to create something that's much bigger, then I think that's a successful partnership. The second thing is strategic alignment. So one of the first exercises that I do whenever I'm working with any of the partners or whenever I'm trying to onboard a partner in my previous role is to try to understand what are their strategic goals, what's their mission, what's their vision, what are they trying to achieve? Does their strategy and their goals, do they align with my strategy and goals? Do we believe in the same thing? Once we have that alignment, then the clear next step is usually how can we create clear, tangible, and measurable results? Going from a strategy discussion to a more tangible, measurable discussion is sometimes very difficult because usually when you're on a strategy, you're talking about your mission, you're talking about your vision, you're talking about it's a lot more high level. And the challenge is within that first few days, first few months of the engagement, you want to take that and you want to turn it into tangible and measurable results. And you don't want 200 different tangible and measurable results. You want to limit it to a certain number of results that you think are going to be most impactful for both organizations. So for me, these are the 10 things that I think are most impactful. For you, these are the 10 things that are most impactful. How can we marry those and come up with a list of 5 things that we want to make sure we want to achieve within a certain time frame? And we continue to measure those, and we continue to make sure that we're working towards them, and we continue to communicate. So the 4th is open communication, which I think is key also, because if you're not able to continuously communicate about what you're doing, how you can improve working together, then it's very difficult for you to manage partnerships. The 5th is the methodology to manage disputes. So with any partnership, especially in the beginning, but along the lifetime of any partnership, you're going to always have disputes, especially if it's a partnership that involves 200 people from one company and 200 people from the other company. The more people are engaged, the more dynamic that partnership is. And also you continue to have or to experience conflict, you continue to experience disputes, unless you have a methodology between the relationship managers on how you're going to manage these disputes, the partnership will become very difficult. Management of disputes, you can create a governance structure, you can create a methodology that is going to help you in terms of escalations and so on. And once things are escalated to a certain point, so you have to create that structure between you and your partner in order to be able to manage things. The final thing is agility. So especially with COVID, all of the changes that have happened and are continuing to happen, again, change is a constant. I can't say it enough, right? So unless you both have the agility and you have the understanding that, yes, we're going to set tangible and measurable results. However, in a month or in 2 months or in a quarter, if all of the factors change, or many of the variables change, we are flexible and agile enough to go back and say, okay, let's make these changes. Let's pivot from that point. Let's try to make an adjustment in order for us to be able to continuously get better results. So I think agility is the sixth pillar, and I think it's also quite important for both organizations to exercise agility. Finally, from a partnership selection, so in the fintech space, what are some of the areas that I typically look at, or in the technology space, what are the things that I typically look at when it comes to compatibility from a partner perspective? I think that there's the technical compatibility piece, which is, you know, if you're integrating with another solution. So the solution fitting and flexibility, integration capabilities, the pricing engine capability, infrastructure depth. I think especially in fintechs, security and fraud management is extremely important, reliability, SLAs. But also it's important is the user experience, because at the end of the day, if you're integrating with another solution or when you're working with another company, even if their user experience doesn't directly impact yours, you're able to understand whether they're customer-centric or not through that user experience. And then finally, the ability to add different rails or currencies is also an example of the technical compatibility. Next is the commercial and regulatory compatibility. So obviously compatible culture is very important. Strategic fit and mutual benefit approach, back to the shared value. The thought leadership, so you want to make sure that you're aligned from a thought leadership perspective. Agility, ability to execute, deliver, and make changes. Coverage, distribution network across, here I'm giving an example of Lebanon, but basically within the country or within the region, are you able to have the coverage that's going to allow you to expand further in that region if that's your objective, or expand further in that country if that's your objective? How are you capitalizing on that coverage and distribution? The delivery method and reach, let's say, for example, if this is for cash delivery, or basically the extent of that network that the other company or partner has. Same, are they client-centric? Compliance is huge. So I think that the more I get exposure to the fintech industry, again, I've been in the fintech industry for about 2 years now, or the payments industry, especially when you're going into new markets, it's crucial that you're able to, or that you're making sure that from a compliance perspective, not only is the company that you're looking to partner with or integrate with, not only are they compliant today, but what is their thought process about compliance? So are they continuously able to maintain compliance as they expand into different regions? Are they able to maintain compliance within the same region as it continues to change? And that's a huge issue for us as a fintech in the payment space. Finally, the focus on the market segment, familiarity with the local market requirements and challenges, scalability, financial backing and stability, reliability, the fee structure, whether it's low cost, and also the transparency of their fees. Finally, how can I help you? So I think that from my end, I have experience in different industries, payments, fintech, healthcare, IT, F&B, supply chain management, and logistics. I also have experience in partnerships, strategy to execution, business development and sales, commercialization, program management, from a regional perspective, it's the Middle East and Africa, but I also have experience in many other random places around the world. I'm happy to help, and I'm happy to be part of this program. So obviously, through the guys at FinTech Hive, you can reach me. I'll provide you my email address, my LinkedIn, anything that I can support with, I'm always happy to help.